Marcus Chen adjusted his thick-rimmed glasses and clutched his worn leather satchel closer to his chest as the massive alien transport ship shuddered to a halt. The detention bay reeked of fear and desperation, filled with representatives from dozens of species across the galaxy. Most were warriors, their muscular frames and battle scars telling stories of conflict. Others were diplomats, their elegant robes now torn and dirty from weeks of captivity. Then there was Marcus, a 22-year-old xenobiology student from Earth, who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, when the Zephyrian Empire decided to make an example of the newest species to join the galactic community. The Zephyrians were a proud warrior race, standing nearly 8 feet tall with chitinous exoskeletons that gleamed like black metal. Their forearms ended in razor-sharp claws, and their compound eyes missed nothing. They had conquered most of the known galaxy through a combination of superior technology and ruthless efficiency. When humanity had dared to establish a research station on what they claimed was a Zephyrian holy world, the Empire had responded swiftly. "Attention prisoners." The translator device crackled to life as Commander Vextar entered the detention bay. His exoskeleton was decorated with battle honors, each scar a testament to his victories. "You will now face the trial of the Serpent Pit. This ancient tradition will determine your worthiness to serve the Empire as slaves, or your fitness to die with whatever honor your pathetic species can muster." The assembled prisoners shifted nervously. Marcus had read about the trial in his xenocultural studies. The Serpent Pit was exactly what it sounded like. A deep cavern filled with Thanatos serpents, massive predators native to the Zephyrian homeworld. These creatures were intelligent, patient hunters that could grow up to 30 feet in length. Their venom could paralyze most known species within seconds, and their crushing strength could break the bones of a Zephyrian warrior. "Each of you will be lowered into the pit," Vextar continued, his mandibles clicking with what Marcus had learned was the Zephyrian equivalent of amusement. "You will remain there for one full cycle. Those who survive may serve, those who do not." He gestured dismissively with one of his forearms. The prisoners were processed one by one. Marcus watched as a Klaxon berserker, nearly 7 feet of pure muscle and rage, was lowered into the darkness below. His defiant roars echoed up from the pit for several minutes before ending in a wet, choking sound. A elegant Valdorian diplomat followed, her telepathic pleas for mercy ignored by the emotionless guards. When Marcus's turn came, the Zephyrian guards looked almost disappointed. One of them, a junior officer named Kesra, shook his head as he attached the lowering harness to Marcus's thin frame. "This one won't last 5 minutes," Kesra clicked to his companion. "Look at him. Weak, soft, no natural weapons. Why do the humans even bother to explore space with such fragile specimens?" Marcus said nothing as they secured the ropes. His mind was racing, not with panic, but with calculations. He had spent the last 3 weeks studying every aspect of Zephyrian culture and biology that he could observe. More importantly, he had been listening to the sounds coming from the pit below, the movement patterns, the breathing rhythms, the subtle acoustic signatures that suggested how many serpents were down there and where they might be positioned. As the platform lowered him into the darkness, Marcus reached into his satchel and pulled out what appeared to be a simple electronic tablet, his personal research device that the Zephyrians had dismissed as harmless human technology. They had been partially right. It was primarily an educational tool, loaded with xenobiology databases, linguistic analysis programs, and cultural studies materials. But Marcus had spent his entire academic career learning to see patterns where others saw chaos. The pit was vast, easily 50 meters across and 20 meters deep. Phosphorescent fungi provided a dim, eerie light that cast shifting shadows across the rocky walls. Marcus could see movement in those shadows, sinuous shapes that moved with deadly purpose. His tablet's sensors immediately began collecting data on heat signatures, movement patterns, and chemical traces in the air. The first serpent to investigate him was smaller than the others, probably a juvenile about 15 feet long. It emerged from behind a large boulder with fluid grace, its scales shifting color to match the environment around it. Marcus remained perfectly still, not from fear, but because movement would disrupt his data collection. The serpent approached cautiously, its forked tongue tasting the air around this strange new arrival. Marcus could see the creature's heat signature on his tablet, could track the dilation of its pupils, could measure the frequency of its tongue flicks. This was exactly what he had hoped for, an opportunity to study one of the galaxy's most feared predators up close. His tablet chimed softly as it completed its initial analysis. The serpent's head snapped toward the sound, but Marcus was already interpreting the data. The chemical signatures in the air told him there were exactly 7 serpents in the pit, 3 adults and 4 juveniles. The movement patterns suggested they were territorial, but not actively hunting at the moment. Most importantly, the acoustic analysis revealed something fascinating about their communication methods. Marcus slowly reached into his satchel and pulled out a small sonic generator, originally designed for studying whale songs back on Earth, but now repurposed for something far more dangerous. He began to replicate the low-frequency vibrations he had detected in the serpent's movements, the subsonic rumbles that seemed to carry meaning. The juvenile serpent cocked its massive head, clearly puzzled by the sounds coming from this strange, soft creature. Marcus adjusted the frequency, drawing on his knowledge of reptilian communication patterns and his analysis of the serpent's behavior over the past few minutes. Gradually, he began to establish a crude form of communication. The vibrations meant no threat, and territory respected, and peaceful intentions. The serpent's aggressive posture relaxed slightly, though it remained alert and curious. Hours passed in the darkness below, while above, the Zephyrian guards grew increasingly puzzled. The human should have been dead long ago, yet they could hear no sounds of combat, no screams of terror or pain. Commander Vextar himself came to observe, his compound eyes straining to pierce the gloom of the pit. "Status report," he demanded of the guard monitoring the pit. "Sir, the human remains alive. We detect no signs of struggle. The serpents appear to be dormant." Vextar's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Dormant? Thanatos serpents are never dormant when prey is present. Lower a surveillance drone." The small mechanical device descended into the pit and transmitted its findings to the command screen. What they saw defied all explanation. The human sat cross-legged near the center of the pit, apparently reading something on his primitive device. Around him, the 7 Thanatos serpents had arranged themselves in a rough circle. Not sleeping, but not hunting either. They appeared to be listening. "What is that creature doing?" Vextar growled. On the screen, they could see Marcus occasionally making soft sounds toward the serpents, who would respond with subtle movements or position shifts. The largest of the adults, a magnificent specimen nearly 30 feet long, had positioned itself closest to the human, its great head only meters away from Marcus's seated form. "It appears to be communicating with them, sir," the technician reported, his voice uncertain. "Impossible. Thanatos serpents are apex predators. They do not communicate with prey species. They certainly do not communicate with soft mammals." But even as Vextar spoke, the evidence was undeniable on the screen before them. As the hours continued to pass, more Zephyrian officers gathered to watch this unprecedented event. Some suggested that the human had used some form of technology to subdue the serpents, but their scans showed no energy signatures that could account for such an effect. Others theorized that this particular human might be some sort of specialized warrior or psychic, but he appeared to be exactly what his records indicated, a young academic with no combat training or extraordinary abilities. The truth was both simpler and more complex than any of them could have imagined. Marcus had spent his life studying the patterns that connected all living things. Every species, no matter how alien, followed certain biological and behavioral rules. Communication was universal, even if the methods varied wildly. What the Zephyrians saw as impossible, Marcus saw as simply another puzzle to solve. In the pit below, Marcus continued his patient work. His tablet now contained detailed behavioral profiles of each serpent, their individual communication styles, their social hierarchy, even their apparent emotional states. The largest adult, which he had mentally designated as the Alpha, seemed particularly intelligent and curious about this unprecedented situation. Through careful observation and gradual experimentation, Marcus had begun to understand the serpent's true nature. They were indeed apex predators, but they were also highly social creatures with complex territorial and family structures. The pit itself was not just a prison for victims. It was the serpents' home, their territory, their sanctuary. They had learned to associate the arrival of new prisoners with food, but they were also intelligent enough to recognize when something unusual was happening. Marcus represented something unprecedented in their experience, a creature that was clearly not a threat, not trying to escape, and most remarkably, was attempting to communicate rather than fight or flee. This had triggered their curiosity rather than their predatory instincts. As the designated trial period approached its end, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Using the communication protocols he had painstakingly established, he began to teach the Serpents something they had never encountered before: the concept of cooperation between species. Above, Commander Vextar watched in growing amazement as the human demonstrated an impossible rapport with creatures that had killed thousands of warriors over the centuries. When the trial period officially ended and the platform was lowered to retrieve the survivor, Marcus calmly gathered his belongings and stepped aboard, leaving behind 7 Thanatos Serpents who watched his departure with what could only be described as regret. As Marcus was raised back to the detention level, he carried with him not just his survival, but something far more significant: proof that intelligence and understanding could bridge even the most unlikely gaps between species. The Zephyrians, for all their military might and technological superiority, had just witnessed something their warrior culture had never imagined possible. The question now was whether they would recognize the implications of what they had seen, or whether they would dismiss it as an inexplicable anomaly. Marcus suspected the answer would determine not just his own fate, but possibly the future relationship between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire itself. The detention bay fell silent as Marcus stepped off the platform, his clothes dusty but intact, his expression calm, despite having just spent hours in what was supposed to be certain death. Commander Vextar studied the human with new interest, his compound eyes taking in every detail of this unprecedented survivor. "Explain what occurred in the pit," Vextar commanded, his forearms crossed in a gesture Marcus recognized as deep skepticism mixed with grudging curiosity. Marcus adjusted his glasses and looked directly at the towering alien commander. "I communicated with them. The Thanatos Serpents are not mindless predators as your culture believes. They are intelligent social creatures with complex behavioral patterns and communication methods." The assembled Zephyrian officers exchanged glances that Marcus had learned indicated either amusement or contempt, often both. Kesra, the junior officer who had supervised Marcus's descent, clicked his mandibles dismissively. "Impossible. We have studied these creatures for millennia. They are weapons of nature, perfectly designed killing machines. They do not communicate with prey. They don't consider everything that enters their territory as prey," Marcus replied calmly. "They make distinctions based on threat assessment, behavior patterns, and communication attempts. I showed them I wasn't a threat and attempted to understand their social structure. They responded accordingly." Commander Vextar leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the much smaller human. "You claim to have learned their language in a few hours, something our greatest xenolinguists have failed to achieve in centuries?" "Not their language exactly," Marcus explained, pulling out his tablet to show the data he had collected. "Their communication is primarily subsonic and chemical, with body language components. It's not verbal in the way most species communicate, which is probably why your linguists missed it. They were looking for the wrong type of signals." The tablet's screen displayed complex waveform analyses, chemical composition breakdowns, and behavioral pattern mappings. To the Zephyrians, it looked like incomprehensible human mathematics, but Marcus could read the story it told. A story of first contact between 2 intelligent species that had never truly seen each other before. Vextar gestured to his science officer, a lean Zephyrian named Thexal, whose exoskeleton was marked with the symbols of the Imperial Research Division. "Verify his claims." Thexal approached the tablet with obvious skepticism, but as he studied the data, his expression shifted from dismissal to confusion to something approaching amazement. "Commander, these readings, they show patterns in the creature's behavior that we have never detected. Organized patterns." "Organized how?" "Territorial markings, social hierarchies, even what appears to be conversation." "Sir, if this data is accurate, we have been fundamentally wrong about the nature of the Thanatos Serpents." The implications hit the assembled Zephyrians like a physical blow. The trial of the Serpent Pit was not just a test of combat prowess. It was an ancient ritual that formed the foundation of their understanding of strength and survival. If the Serpents were intelligent beings rather than mindless beasts, what did that mean for centuries of Zephyrian tradition? Marcus watched their reactions carefully, his training in xenocultural studies allowing him to read their body language and understand the magnitude of what he had revealed. He decided to press his advantage. "Commander Vextar, I'd like to propose an exchange of information." I can teach your researchers how to properly communicate with the Thanatos serpents, revealing aspects of their behavior and intelligence that could revolutionize your understanding of your own homeworld's ecology. In return, I ask that you reconsider humanity's status within the Empire. The commander's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of intense thought processing that Marcus had observed during his weeks of captivity. You would share this knowledge, even knowing we could simply take it from you? You could try, Marcus replied with a slight smile. But xenolinguistic communication protocols aren't something you can extract through force. They require understanding, patience, and most importantly, the right mindset. I've spent my entire academic career learning to see patterns where others see chaos. That's not something you can replicate without genuine cooperation. Vextar was quiet for several long moments, his forearms moving in subtle patterns that Marcus recognized as complex decision-making processes. Finally, he spoke. Very well, human. You will demonstrate your methods to our research teams. If your claims prove accurate, we will discuss revised terms for humanity's integration into the Empire. What followed were 3 weeks of intensive collaboration that changed everything both species thought they knew about intelligence and communication. Marcus worked alongside Zephyrian xenobiologists, sharing his methodologies and teaching them to recognize the subtle patterns he had discovered. The breakthrough came when Dr. Xelthara, the Empire's leading expert on Thanatos serpents, successfully established basic communication with the alpha serpent Marcus had befriended. The massive creature, which had been held in research captivity for over a decade, responded to properly formatted subsonic signals with what could only be described as enthusiasm. It's trying to tell us something, Doctor, Xelthara reported, her normally steady voice shaking with excitement. Complex concepts about territory, family groups, even what appears to be historical information about changes in their environment. Marcus nodded as he monitored the communication exchange. The serpents have an oral, or rather, subsonic, tradition. They pass down information about their territory through generations. They've been watching Zephyrian civilization develop for thousands of years, learning about your species just as you've been studying them. The revelations kept coming. The Thanatos serpents were not just intelligent, they were historians, ecologists, and philosophers in their own right. They had observed the rise of Zephyrian civilization from the perspective of the original inhabitants of the homeworld. They understood concepts like time, change, and even basic principles of what humans would recognize as science. More importantly, they had opinions about the changes to their world, about the species that had become dominant, and about the proper relationship between different forms of intelligence. Through Marcus's translation protocols, they expressed something that stunned the Zephyrian research team. They respected Zephyrian technological achievements but were concerned about the environmental impact of rapid expansion. Commander Vextar arrived at the research facility on the day of the most significant breakthrough. Dr. Xelthara had successfully engaged 3 different serpents in a coordinated discussion about territorial boundaries and resource sharing. The creatures were not just communicating, they were negotiating. They want to propose a formal arrangement, Marcus explained as he interpreted the complex subsonic patterns flowing between the serpents and the research team. Shared custody of certain territories on the homeworld. They're offering to help manage the ecosystem in exchange for protected habitat areas. Vextar stared at the display showing the serpent's communication patterns, his compound eyes reflecting the data streams and fractal patterns. They want to make a treaty? With us? They've always wanted to, Marcus replied. They just didn't know how to communicate with you. And you didn't know they were trying. This isn't really about the serpents at all, Commander. It's about intelligence taking different forms and the importance of learning to recognize and respect those differences. The implications extended far beyond the homeworld. If the Thanatos serpents were intelligent, what did that suggest about other species the Zephyrians had dismissed as mere animals? How many potential allies, advisors, and partners had they overlooked because they couldn't recognize intelligence that didn't match their own patterns? But more immediately relevant to Marcus's situation was what this meant for humanity's place in the Empire, a species that could bridge the communication gap between Zephyrians and their own homeworld's apex predators clearly possessed valuable abilities that went beyond simple academic knowledge. Your species continues to surprise us, human, Vextar admitted as they watched Dr. Xelthara successfully coordinate a 3-way discussion between herself, Marcus, and the Serpent Council. We expected you to be either useful slaves or honorable dead. We did not expect you to rewrite our understanding of intelligence itself. Marcus looked up at the towering commander, noting the subtle changes in his posture that indicated a shift in how he viewed not just Marcus, but humanity as a whole. That's because you were thinking about us in terms of your existing categories. Sometimes the most important discoveries come from finding entirely new categories. The research facility buzzed with activity as teams worked around the clock to establish communication protocols with serpents across the homeworld. Each successful contact revealed new information about ecosystem management, territorial boundaries, and the complex social structures that had existed beneath Zephyrian awareness for millennia. Marcus found himself at the center of these efforts, not just as a translator but as a bridge between two completely different ways of understanding intelligence and communication. His role had evolved from prisoner to consultant to something approaching diplomatic liaison, not just between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire, but between the Empire and the intelligent species that had been sharing their worlds all along. As the weeks passed, word of the discoveries spread throughout the Zephyrian command structure. What had begun as a simple execution ritual had evolved into a fundamental challenge to the Empire's understanding of intelligence, dominance, and the proper relationship between different species. Marcus began to realize that his survival in the Serpent Pit had set in motion changes that would ripple throughout the galaxy. The question was no longer whether humanity would be accepted as slaves or eliminated as threats. The question had become whether the entire structure of the Zephyrian Empire could adapt to the revelation that intelligence came in forms they had never imagined, and that their newest subjects might possess abilities that could transform how they understood the universe itself. 6 months after Marcus Chen had calmly walked out of the Thanatos Serpent Pit, the Zephyrian Empire was undergoing the most significant transformation in its 1,000-year history. The discovery that their homeworld's apex predators were intelligent beings with complex social structures had triggered a cascade of revelations that challenged every assumption about intelligence, dominance, and the nature of civilization itself. Marcus stood in what had once been a simple research facility, and was now the Empire's first interspecies communication institute. Banks of computers processed the linguistic and behavioral patterns of dozens of species that had previously been classified as non-sentient. The air hummed with subsonic transmissions, chemical analysis chambers, and the excited conversations of researchers who were rewriting xenobiology textbooks daily. Status report. Commander Vextar requested as he entered the main laboratory. His title had evolved too. He was now Director of Interspecies Relations, a position that hadn't existed before Marcus's demonstration in the Serpent Pit. Dr. Zelthara looked up from a communication console where she was coordinating with a council of Thanatos serpents about terraforming protocols on the third moon of Zephyr Prime. We've established communication protocols with 17 previously unknown intelligent species across 12 worlds. The ecological management proposals alone could revolutionize how we approach planetary development. Marcus smiled as he watched the data streams flowing across multiple displays. Each screen represented a breakthrough that most xenobiologists would have considered impossible just months earlier. The Crystalline Collective on Vextar's belt wants to discuss mineral extraction partnerships. They've been trying to communicate through resonant frequency patterns for decades, but everyone assumed it was just geological noise. And the atmospheric symbionts on Kesisthera 7 have detailed climate management protocols they're willing to share, added Dr. Telvax, the newest member of the team. They've been maintaining that planet's weather systems for millennia, but we thought it was natural climate stability. Vextar moved through the laboratory with something approaching wonder, his compound eyes taking in displays that showed intelligence manifesting in ways his species had never imagined. Gaseous beings that thought in chemical gradients, silicon-based entities that processed information through crystal matrix formations, symbiotic organisms that shared consciousness across entire ecosystems. How many more? He asked Marcus. Unknown, Marcus replied honestly. Every species we study reveals new communication methods, which helps us identify other potential intelligences we've missed. The pattern suggests that intelligence might be far more common in the universe than any species has realized. We've just been looking for it in the wrong ways. The transformation hadn't been limited to xenobiology. Military doctrine was being completely revised as the Empire grappled with the realization that many of their conquered worlds might actually be inhabited by intelligent beings they had simply failed to recognize. Diplomatic protocols were being developed for species that communicated through methods ranging from controlled gravitational fluctuations to organized quantum entanglement patterns. But perhaps most significantly, Humanity's status within the Empire had changed from potential slaves to essential partners. Human cognitive patterns, it turned out, were particularly well suited to recognizing and adapting to non-standard forms of intelligence. Where other species tended to look for intelligence that matched their own patterns, humans seemed naturally inclined to assume intelligence could take almost any form. The High Council has reached a decision, Vextar announced, his forearms moving in formal declaration patterns. Humanity will be granted full species partnership within the Empire, with autonomous control over your existing territories and shared governance rights on worlds where your expertise is essential. Marcus felt a surge of relief and pride, though he tried to keep his expression neutral. And the other species we've identified? Full diplomatic recognition for all confirmed intelligences, with reparations protocols for any species that may have been inadvertently harmed by our previous policies. Your species has taught us that true strength comes not from domination, but from cooperation between different forms of intelligence. The implications were staggering. The Zephyrian Empire, which had conquered most of the galaxy through military might, was transforming into something unprecedented. A truly interspecies cooperative, where intelligence in all its forms was valued and protected. Dr. Zelthara approached with a communication tablet showing the latest data from the Thanatos Serpent Councils. Marcus, they want to speak with you directly, something about a proposal that could affect the entire galaxy. Marcus accepted the tablet and activated the subsonic communication protocols he had developed. The conversation that followed was complex, involving concepts that barely translated into any verbal language, but the core message was clear. The Thanatos Serpents, in consultation with other newly recognized intelligences across the Empire, wanted to propose the establishment of a galactic intelligence preservation and communication network. Species that had mastered interstellar communication could help identify and protect intelligent life on worlds throughout the galaxy, ensuring that no civilization would again make the mistake of overlooking intelligence simply because it took unfamiliar forms. They're proposing to make first contact protocols a galaxy-wide standard, Marcus translated, his voice filled with excitement. Mandatory intelligence surveys before any colonization or resource extraction. Protected status for any world, showing signs of potential intelligence, regardless of how that intelligence manifests. Vextar was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Such a proposal would require cooperation between species that had been enemies for generations. It would mean admitting that military conquest was fundamentally flawed as a method of galactic expansion. It would require the Empire to reach out to other galactic powers and convince them to adopt similar protocols. The Council will need to vote on this, he said finally. But given what we've learned, I believe they will approve. We cannot return to our previous ignorance now that we understand what we were blind to. Marcus nodded, then had another thought. There's something else to consider. If intelligence is this common and this diverse, and if we've been missing it on such a massive scale, what does that suggest about the possibility of intelligences we still haven't learned to recognize? The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything they thought they had learned. Dr. Zelthara pulled up long-range sensor data from unexplored regions of the galaxy. Energy patterns that don't match any known natural phenomena. Organized structures on scales we assumed were purely geological. Communication signals we've been dismissing as cosmic background noise. Space-based intelligences, Marcus mused, studying the data patterns. Beings that exist in the void between stars, or in the hearts of stellar phenomena themselves. Intelligence that operates on timescales so vast we wouldn't recognize their thoughts as communication. Vextar's mandibles clicked rapidly as he contemplated the possibility. If such beings exist, our entire understanding of galactic politics would need to be reconsidered. We might not be having first contact with them. They might have been observing our civilizations for millions of years. The laboratory fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. They had started by learning to communicate with predators in a pit. Now they were contemplating the possibility that the galaxy itself might be filled with forms of intelligence so vast and alien that previous generations of explorers had mistaken them for natural phenomena. One discovery at a time, Marcus said finally, though his eyes were bright with the prospect of future challenges. We've got 17 confirmed new intelligences to integrate into galactic society, a complete revision of first contact protocols to implement, and a galaxy-wide communication network to establish. The cosmic intelligences can wait until we've mastered communication with our planetary neighbors. But even as he spoke, Marcus was already running preliminary analyses on the deep space energy patterns, developing theories about how intelligence might manifest on stellar and galactic scales. His tablet chimed softly with new data from the ongoing surveys, each signal potentially representing another mind that had been waiting for someone to learn how to listen. Vextar watched the young human with something approaching awe. When we captured you, we thought we were taking a weak specimen of a primitive species. Instead, we found someone who would reshape our understanding of intelligence itself. Marcus looked around the laboratory, where beings from multiple species were working together to decode the languages of entities they were still learning to recognize as intelligent. Human researchers collaborated with Zephyrian linguists, Thanatos Serpent advisors, and representatives from a dozen other newly contacted species. What had begun as a survival situation had become the foundation for a completely new approach to galactic civilization. I think, Marcus said quietly, that every species probably has capabilities that others haven't recognized yet. Humans just happen to be good at recognizing intelligence that doesn't match expected patterns. But I bet every species here could teach the others something fundamental about the universe if we just learned how to ask the right questions. The transformation of the Zephyrian Empire from a military conquest state to a cooperative intelligence preservation alliance would take years to complete. There would be resistance from traditionalist factions, complications from species that preferred isolation, and the enormous challenge of developing communication protocols for forms of intelligence that operated on completely alien principles. But as Marcus watched the data streams showing successful communication links being established across dozens of worlds, he felt confident that they were moving in the right direction. The universe was far stranger, far more intelligent, and far more wonderful than any single species had imagined. Learning to recognize and cooperate with that intelligence would be the work of generations, and it had all started with a geeky human boy who had been thrown into a pit with monsters and had calmly decided to try talking to them instead of fighting them. Sometimes the most profound revolutions began with the simple act of choosing conversation over conflict, understanding over assumption, and curiosity over fear. The galaxy would never be the same,